If you were trapped in minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit cold, your first instinct would be heat. More fire, more warmth, faster. And that instinct can get people into trouble very fast, because in this kind of cold, survival does not begin when a shelter feels warm. It begins when your body stops losing heat so fast that your hands fail, your thinking slows, and your next decision gets worse. That is why one of the smartest survival shelters ever built is made from snow. And here is the part most people miss. If you heat it the wrong way, the same shelter that protects you can turn wet, unstable, and dangerous from the inside. So how did the Inuit stay warm inside an igloo without destroying the balance that kept them alive? Some of the visuals in this video are AI-assisted cinematic recreations, but the survival logic is real. This is not about making a frozen shelter cozy. This is about controlling heat loss, airflow, moisture, and structure well enough to stay alive in a place that punishes every mistake. And in extreme cold, mistakes do not stay small for long. Wind is the thief, moisture is the traitor. Bad air is the silent collapse. That is the real fight. An igloo is not just a snow shelter, it is a heat control system. A small survival machine built to slow heat loss, sort air by height, and keep the cold from taking too much too fast. That is the whole game. Most people think cold kills in one simple way. It does not. In real winter survival, the danger comes in layers. Wind strips heat faster. Wet fabric destroys insulation. Cold surfaces pull warmth out of the body. Large spaces waste heat. Bad airflow lets warmth escape upward while cold air settles right where you are trying to sleep. That is why the igloo works. Not because snow is warm. Snow is not warm, but packed snow traps still air, and still air is one of the simplest insulators you can get. The Inuit were not building with cold material, they were building with trapped air. That sounds like a small distinction? It is not. The wall is not just snow. It is compressed, airlocked inside snow. If the snow is too soft, it collapses. Fresh powder may contain plenty of air, but it does not hold shape. If it is too dense, you lose part of the insulating advantage. The useful snow sits in the middle. Wind-packed snow. Snow that can be cut into blocks. Snow that is strong enough to stand, but porous enough to slow heat loss. That is the first rule. The shelter only starts helping you when the material can both hold shape and trap usable air. Then comes shape. The dome is not there because it looks primitive or elegant. It is there because it works. The curve spreads force. It helps the shell hold together under pressure. But just as important, it keeps the shelter compact. That matters more than most people think. In Sabara, cold extra space is not comfort. Extra space is workload. Every bit of air inside that shelter has to be warmed somehow. The larger the interior, the harder it is for body heat or a small heat source to matter. A roomy shelter feels better in the imagination. A compact shelter often performs better in reality. In this kind of cold, survival does not reward spaciousness. It rewards efficiency. That is where modern instinct often fails. People chase space when they should be chasing control. The igloo stays small on purpose, not because the builders wanted discomfort, because in a place like this, a shelter that wastes less heat gives you more survival margin. And then you get to the smartest detail of all. The entrance. The entrance is not just where you crawl in, it is part of the thermal system. Cold air falls, so the Inuit gave it somewhere else to go. By dropping the entrance tunnel lower than the main chamber, they turned the doorway into a cold trap instead of a pipeline. When outside air enters, it sinks into the low section instead of flooding directly into the living and sleeping space. That one detail changes everything, because now the cold has somewhere else to settle. And that is why the sleeping platform matters too. You do not sleep at the lowest point if you can avoid it. You sleep higher, above the trapped cold air, where the warmer air gathers. In a shelter like this, even height matters. Air near the sleeping platform can feel dramatically better than the colder air settling lower down. That is not comfort design. That is survival geometry. The right shelter does not just surround you. It organizes the air around you. Now we get to heat. And this is where people make the next big mistake. They assume survival means building the biggest fire possible, or pushing the inside temperature as high as possible. But inside an igloo, the first important heat source is often the people inside it. Human bodies are constantly giving off heat. In a compact, insulated shelter with low wind movement, that heat starts to matter. A few people in a tight, insulated space are not a small detail. They are part of the heating system. That is the smarter order. Stop heat loss first, then make body heat count. Then add extra heat carefully, not the other way around. That is why an igloo is such a powerful survival lesson. It teaches restraint. It teaches that a shelter does not need to feel hot to be doing its job well. It needs to be controlled. In winter survival, warmth is only useful when it stays on your side. The moment warmth starts creating moisture, weakening surface, or fouling the air, it stops being a clean advantage. That is where the paradox begins. At first, a little warming can help. A lightly warmed inner surface may tighten the shell as it refreezes. Small gaps can seal. The shelter can become more efficient. But the better the shelter holds heat, the more dangerous bad balance becomes. A sealed shelter can keep warmth in. It can also keep moisture in. It can keep bad air in. That is the paradox. The same efficiency that protects you can start betraying you if you push it too far. A little warming can tighten the shell. Too much warming starts a chain reaction. First, the inner surface softens. Too much tin moisture builds. Then, surfaces begin to dampen. Then dripping starts. Then bedding gets damp. Then insulation loses performance. Then your body starts losing heat faster again, especially when you stop moving. Then sleep gets worse. Then judgment gets worse. Then small mistakes become big ones. That is the chain. Too much warmth inside a snow shelter does not simply make it more comfortable. It can begin a slow collapse of the very system keeping you alive. That is why overheating is such a dangerous mistake. That is why the real target inside an igloo is not maximum heat. It is controlled heat. Warm enough to protect life. Dry enough to preserve insulation. Ventilated enough to keep the air safe. Stable enough to keep the structure working for you instead of against you. That balance is everything. If you have ever tried heating a freezing room too fast and ended up with damp windows, wet surfaces, or that heavy feeling that the air is going bad, then you already know the beginning of this problem. Same rule here. Smaller shelter, higher stakes, and in an igloo, the stakes are very high. Because warmth is not the only thing you are managing. You are also managing air quality. A well-built igloo is efficient. That is the blessing. It is also the risk, because a shelter that holds heat too well can also hold moisture and bad air too well if you stop managing airflow. If you use a flame inside a small snow shelter and ventilation is poor, you are not just fighting cold anymore. You are risking oxygen problems, combustion gases, and the kind of slow invisible failure that does not feel dangerous until it already is. That is why sealing everything shut is not wisdom. Controlled airflow is wisdom. It means letting the shelter breathe without letting it bleed. So how do you keep that balance? First, structure before heat. Before you think about adding more warmth, fix the way warmth is escaping. Use the right snow. Keep the shelter compact. Keep the entrance low. Keep the sleeping space higher. Block drafts, seal the gaps that should be sealed. If the structure is wrong, Extra heat either leaks away or creates moisture trouble faster. Second, gentle heat, not aggressive heat. A small, steady source is very different from trying to blast the shelter warm. In winter survival, a shelter that is manageable beats a shelter that is briefly warmer and then wetter, weaker, or harder to breathe in. The point is to stop giving the Arctic easy ways to strip you down. Third, read the shelter. That may be the most practical skill in this whole system. The shelter tells you what is happening if you pay attention. Are the walls just firm and lightly glazed, or are they starting to drip? Is the bedding dry, or slowly turning damp? Is the air tolerable, or thick and bad? Are you preserving warmth, or trading warmth for moisture and bad air? If you notice the shift early, you still have control. If you ignore it, the shelter starts making decisions for you. And that brings us to the 3 deadly mistakes. The first is choosing the wrong snow and trusting weak structure. If the blocks are poor, the entire system begins weaker. Insulation suffers. Stability suffers. And in extreme cold, a weak shelter means wasted energy, wasted time, and rising risk. The second is getting the layout wrong. If the entrance sits too high, or the sleeping area sits too low, cold air moves right where you need warmth most. That mistake feels small at first. It is not. It drains you hour after hour. The third is overheating or oversealing the shelter while using flame. This one is deadly because it feels like safety. People want more warmth, so they seal more, heat more, and push harder. But too much heat raises moisture. Too little ventilation fouls the air. And once a snow shelter starts getting wet, heavy, or hard to breathe in, you are no longer improving survival. You are burning through it. That is the harder truth of winter survival. People do not always fail because they did too little. Sometimes they fail because they pushed the wrong thing too far. And that is why this matters far beyond the Arctic. Most people watching this will never build an igloo, but the logic of the igloo applies almost everywhere winter survival becomes serious. A powerless bedroom, a stranded vehicle, a freezing garage, a cabin, a shed, a temporary shelter inside a larger, cold structure. The rules still hold. Smaller spaces are easier to protect. Still, air matters. Cold air settles. Low. Sleeping higher can help. Dry insulation matters as much as warmth, and sealing a place completely is not the same as managing it well. That is what makes the igloo such a powerful lesson. It is not just a piece of Arctic tradition. It is survival engineering. The Inuit did not survive by overpowering the cold. They survived by controlling what the cold could do next. They slowed the theft of heat. They gave cold air somewhere else to settle. They made body heat matter more. And they never let warmth become so uncontrolled that moisture and bad air took over. So if you want the rule set, here it is. Stop wind first. Trap still air. Keep cold air. Low. Sleep above it. Add heat, carefully. And never make the shelter so warm, wet, or sealed that it starts working against you. That is the real lesson of the igloo. It does not keep people alive by becoming hot. It keeps people alive by slowing heat loss without letting moisture and bad air take over. And that should make you look at your own winter shelter differently. Because in a house, a car, a shed, or a cabin, heat loss is usually only the first. Fight that. Then comes bad air, then moisture, then water. And if you solve the first problem but miss the next 3, you are still not safe. So think about your own space. Where is wind getting in? Where is cold settling low? Where is moisture starting before you notice it? What are you heating that should really be insulated first? If you had to survive one freezing night with no power, what would worry you first? Heat, airflow, or moisture? Put it in the comments, because that tells me exactly what to break down next. Because staying warm is only part of winter survival. What comes after that can still kill the shelter. And that is where we go next.